HSW.com. I am very, very happy to be back here again today with Beat the GMAT to present a webinar for you. We are now in the countdown for round one. Many of you will notice that several of the top schools have released their questions. So today we are talking about gaining admission to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and the top 5 MBA programs. What we will do today is I will take you through some slides and some information. Hopefully that will be about 30 to 40 minutes, and at the end I will take questions and answers. Before we get far, I would like to introduce who we are. MBAadmit.com has been advising for over 25 years. We've worked successfully with candidates to all the top MBA programs, and I am happy to share my expertise. I'm a graduate of Harvard and Oxford, and I have Harvard admissions experience. And I'm able to draw on all of that as I work with candidates to get outstanding outcomes. One thing that's very distinctive about our company is we do price much lower than competitors. We want to make sure that we provide access to our candidates, and we often want to make it affordable for the candidate to work with us on multiple applications, and the lower pricing allows that. So excellence at an affordable price is what we are known for. And we offer a full range of services from essay editing to interview coaching. As I said a few moments ago, we've been successful with all of the top MBA programs, and we know the nuances of admissions for all of those programs, both in the United States and abroad. Feel free to visit our website and take a look at some of those testimonials. We will definitely welcome you signing up for our newsletter. That will allow us to continue to give you additional advice that we will not have time for today, and also to keep you aware of things such as upcoming webinars. For those of you attending today, we are offering a thank you to you, and these are the 3 things that we're happy to provide. First of all, a free profile evaluation. You can go to the website at the address there in blue and make sure to send us your resume. We also have an evaluation form that you can fill out if you like. And just send us that email and we will get you scheduled for a free consultation. We're also offering those who attend 30% off our regular pricing. And we're also offering a free eMBA book. So, or rather a free ebook, which is about MBA admissions. So go to this link in blue and feel free at any time after this session to take advantage of any of those 3 offers. Another thing to make you aware of is that we are going to be doing webinar Wednesdays. About every other Wednesday, we will be hosting a webinar on our website. So we will offer you the opportunity to come and take a look at some of the advice we're offering. Make sure to check our website on the school specials page to see when each of these will be offered. And finally, let's talk about how we're going to structure today's talk. This is the table of contents, and you see what we're going to break down the discussion about. First of all, MBA trends. There are some very interesting changes that have happened in the past year and currently that will affect you and admissions. Secondly, we're going to talk about how you time your application excellently. Third, we will talk about the 4 areas of excellence that you should strive to demonstrate if you're trying very seriously to get into the top 5 MBA programs. Then we're going to talk about how you start to try to identify school-specific nuances of admissions, those things that they care about by school, and make sure you're integrating that into your calculation as you decide where you're competitive and also where you might blend in. And then finally, we're going to talk about some high-impact steps to position yourself well for success. MBA admissions trends. Now, the first thing I should say, just in case some of you are not aware, is that many of the top schools have released their essays, everyone from Harvard to Stanford, Wharton, Columbia, and some of the deadlines are quite early. So Harvard this year is early September. So you really do need to start thinking about the whole application process and how to prepare and how to get started. I want to make you aware at the beginning of all this about certain trends that may affect you this year. First of all, the essays for many of the top programs are much shorter. And what that means for you is that you have less space to make your case for why you are a great candidate for the school. When you have the shorter essays, every single word in that essay is going to take on much more importance. And then also it shifts the attention to the other parts of the application. So recommendations, resume, application form, all of those things take on greater importance. Another big change is that many of the top schools are adopting a common recommendation form. Many of you may not have seen the application recommendation forms from the past, but they were extremely detailed at some of the schools. So some of them would ask 9 questions. A typical responder might give 300 word responses, and so therefore you're ending up with a document of about 3,000 words, which is quite long. So the schools are beginning to recognize that's a lot of work for the recommendation writers. They want to make it easier for you to apply, and therefore they're actually adopting a common recommendation form. I think that is a wonderful move. What is less appealing from my vantage point is that they're only asking 2 very short questions, which we will review in a few moments. And in those very short responses, you can't get a whole lot of detail in. So again, every single word is going to be very important. So how you craft those recommendations will matter quite a bit. The impact of all of these changes, shorter essays, shorter recommendation forms, means that the statistics are going to be more important. We've seen the GMAT become a little more important at some of those schools, and that's significant. So if Harvard goes up to 727 average, that will be notable for the person that had the score stuck at 700. So you should be checking each of the websites for the schools you're interested in and see where was their GMAT average last year, because that will shed some light about whether the score you have currently is strong enough. Another trend is that, as I said, the non-essay application components will be more important. That includes your GPA. The interviews are going to be more important because they're going to have less written material. How you present yourself in an interview is more important. So you do want to make sure to try to prepare well for those interviews. The earlier deadlines will affect timing, and so if you are intent on doing round 1 applications, make sure to go take a look at those deadlines and start to pace yourself. And then there was a moderate rise in the number of applicants at some schools last year. And of course, more competition means it's going to be harder for you to gain a seat. So just be aware of that trend. The expectation is that since the recommendation forms are now being standardized among many schools, it's going to be even easier for candidates to apply, which means more competition at most of the top schools. And then finally, women remain underrepresented, which is good news for women in terms of getting into the school. They will be more in demand because there are fewer women applying. I want you to take a concrete look at some of the essay questions. So when we say that they've gotten shorter, what does that mean? How does it look? I have some of the ones that have been released so far. The one caveat is to say that last year, 1 or 2 of the main schools actually changed their essays slightly between the original informal release of the essay question and when the actual formal application came out. So this is the information we have right now, but definitely double check these topics once you see the formal application released. Harvard Business School right now is staying with 1 essay only, which is what they did last year, with no word limit, and this is what they're asking. You're applying to Harvard Business School. We can see your resume, school transcripts, extracurricular activities, awards, post-MBA career goals, test scores, and what your recommendations have to say, recommenders have to say about you. What else would you like us to know as we consider your candidacy? Now, this is a topic that threw many people last year. They didn't know how to approach it. There is no one right way to approach it. It really is dependent on your candidacy. But this one with no word limit could be quite long. It could be as long as 3,000 words. It could be as short as 300 words. And in theory, it's optional, so some candidates could actually apply without writing an essay. Stanford Graduate School of Business has 2 now, which is a significant reduction from the past. They have their classic What Matters Most to You and Why, and then Why Stanford. Wharton has 2, which add up to 400 words if you write the optional. So the first one is, what do you hope to gain both personally and professionally from the Wharton MBA? And then secondly, an optional essay, which they do not restrict to only negative information, so many people will respond to that with additional information that's positive. Columbia has reduced also. It has 2 main essays that together are 750 words, along with a short response. What is your immediate post-MBA goal? The short response, 75 characters, is not 75 words, but really characters, which means it's extremely a small amount of information, pretty much of a sentence, or at best a sentence and a half. So be very careful how you respond to that. And then these other 2, given your individual background and goals, why are you pursuing a Columbia MBA at this time? And then please view the video, how will you take advantage of being at the the very center of business. And do make sure to look at the video if you're going to respond to that question. So very short space relative to the past. In the past, a few years back, about 3 years ago, a typical MBA essay set would be about 2,100 words. So this does represent a significant reduction in essay word limits. It will just mean that you have to take a very strong holistic approach to your application. So I know at MBAadmit.com, we've extended some of our packages to make sure that as we work with candidates, we're able to work on the resume, the application form, and help their recommendation writers know, what makes a great recommendation. All of those components are going to play a big part of your admissions outcomes in addition to the interview. The one exception for a top school so far is Tuck. Seems to have retained a fair amount of content. These are each 500 words, and so you have 1 and 2 which are required, and number 3 which is optional, but many people will use this optional for extra information, some of it positive. So this essay set could be as much as 1,500 words in theory, or the basic, required 2 essays would be 1,000 words, which is, relative to some of these others, a relatively healthy amount of content. The common recommendation, to give you more of a sense of what that is, you have 2 questions, each a very small word limit, 300 words and 250 words. And so how do the candidate's performance potential or personal qualities compare to those of other well-qualified individuals in similar roles? And then they're asking for examples. And then please describe the most important piece of constructive feedback you've given the applicants. Describe the circumstances and the applicant's response. So number 2, again, they're asking for what is the area of feedback, how did you receive it? That one must always be approached with care. So these 2 questions basically are the heart of the recommendation. There will also be a grid where they mark you in terms of strengths with things such as leadership or maturity. And so that, of course, the recommendation writer should give good thought to as well. Among the schools that sound like they're going to be adopting this are Harvard, Stanford, Wharton for certain, and then Columbia, University of Chicago, Yale, Kellogg, and University of Virginia. So quite a number of the top schools. That makes it easier for you to apply, but you just have to take tremendous care with how these are written, that the word content is well used, and then the content should vary somewhat school to school based on what the school is, what the fit is for you, and why you want to go there. As we said before, these are some of the impacts of the changes, that your pure statistics, GPA, GMAT score, the prestige of the company you're working for, the prestige of the college you attended, those things are going to weigh more heavily. The recommendations are prime real estate, that promotions, awards, and other signs of professional success become more important, that your resume and application form must do critical work for you. So you won't have the essay content. Try to use the spaces that you get on the application as effectively as possible. But in general, it probably will be harder for people to override weaknesses, so you have to just do your best to strategically approach the entire application so that it can function for you as effectively as past ones did that provided much more essay content. I am underscoring this one part, that because of the common recommendation shift, that now that there will be one recommendation for multiple schools, it is very likely you will see a rise in applications to the top schools. That means that competition will be more competitive. If you're trying to be conservative in your approach, you would interpret that as, it will be harder to get into some of the schools I wanted to get into, so let me apply to more so that hopefully I will get admissions where I will be happy. So I may not get all the ones I might have gotten 3 years ago, but I will still end up with some at schools that are outstanding that would make me happy. So let's talk about timing the application. Who does timing, what is the importance of this, and who does it most matter to in terms of timing the application? So when I say timing the application, I mean thinking about what range of schools you want to apply to. Say you choose 6. And then you've got to decide, do I do all 6 in round 1, which is very difficult sometimes, or do I spread it out with 4 in round 1 and 2 in round 2? That question is not just a function of how much time do I have. It's also a function of, if I apply in round 2 at a certain school, do I still have strong odds, or are the odds so diminished that I might as well not apply in round 2? You've got to go through the calculation of what are the schools, what are the nuances of admission at each of those schools, how competitive am I, how much leeway do I have in a round 2 versus round 1, and then start to time your applications as excellently as you can. It really can make a fundamental difference. Sometimes I've worked with candidates who say they were American of East Asian background and they had a poor GPA, 2.7, 2.8. Generally speaking, that's a competitive profile, being American of East Asian descent. But if the application is timed well, whether it's Columbia January Start Program, Columbia Early Decision, or around one school at a school where, you know, there's a fit in other ways, that candidate can be successful, but timing would have been critical for that person. So it's in the ideal world, you'll think about this early and then create a strategy that maximizes your chances of success. So what candidates does this matter most for? Those seeking to apply when there are the most seats available, those seeking to leverage admissions feedback. So for instance, if someone is uncertain how they'll fare, they might want to apply to 2 safety schools, 2 reach schools in round 1. They'll get feedback. They'll find out the outcomes before the round 2 deadlines are due. And therefore, with that information, if they didn't get into the most competitive schools, they know to recalibrate and maybe reach for ones close to that ranking but not quite so high. And if they have the admissions at the safetier schools, then wonderful, they have that security. They go into round 2 recalibrating and still aiming somewhat higher than the safety schools that they secured. So feedback, anyone trying to leverage feedback, this could be a good strategy. Candidates who might have credential issues, there are some of the major schools that have a bias against people who are working at the smaller companies. And if you know that that's your situation, timing may matter tremendously. You may need to be in a round 1 pool as opposed to a round 2 pool. And then overrepresented profiles, if you wait to round 2 and you're overrepresented, sometimes you simply won't have options in round 2. Most people know that one of the most difficult profiles is Indian foreign national male engineer. And so for that candidate, they should try very, very, very hard to get all the applications into round 1 or early decision pools, because that could make the tremendous difference between success and lack of success in admissions. And then finally, candidates facing preference challenges. So for instance, if you're applying to a school that is focused on finance and you don't do finance, you're in a non-traditional area, but you really want to be at that school, you know that they don't tend to favor candidates from your background. If that is the case, and internally they've sort of made up their mind about how many non-traditional candidates they'll take, if you wait to round 2, then you're competing for that smaller section of seats that was available in round 1 for your particular profile, being a non-traditional candidate. And so in that situation, round 1 versus round 2 could make a big difference. And so again, understand the school, understand your profile, and how that should affect your timing. Here are some examples of great timing strategies. I won't go through all these, but I'll just pull a couple of them. So again, the Indian foreign national male who applies to all the top choices that he has in round 1, that's a good strategy. Let's take number 3, the foreign national candidate who doesn't know how her GPA will translate, therefore doesn't really understand odds at the schools. So she chooses a good mix in early decision. And once she has outcomes, she knows, okay, if I got into Tuck, then that's a great sign. Maybe I can get into Wharton. If I didn't get into Tuck early decision, then that means that I may not be strong enough for Columbia. So she can use that information to calibrate choices in round 1 and round 2. That is a great timing strategy. So take the chance to read through these 4 examples, and you'll see what we mean when we say time your applications excellently, because that can be a big part of success in admissions. Let's talk about 4 areas of excellence to demonstrate for top 5 admissions success. What you'd strive to do as you're putting your application together is to show that you're a top choice admit. Now, what does that mean? What is a top choice admit? It's someone who has achieved excellence across the board, professional, academic, extracurricular. It's someone who demonstrates clearly through their essays, their resume, and the application form that they have great knowledge and skills to share. It is someone who conveys that they have unique insights based on professional and personal experiences. Someone who comes across as having vision and innovation. Someone who seems very likely to make a great impact post-MBA through their career. And then someone who's likely to make an impact as an MBA student and also as an alumni member. So all of these things taken together create someone who is a top choice admit. When you're trying to demonstrate several of these things, you should be thinking, how do I demonstrate the excellence in the past, the excellence currently, and that in the future I'm very likely to be someone who achieves excellence. So it should be covering not only a breadth of these ideas, but also over time, past, current, and future. Another dimension, in addition to all this, is personal story. So sometimes a candidate has an incredibly unique personal story, lifetime experiences, personal background, or personal achievements. And when that's the case, you certainly want to weave that into the application because it makes you a very unique and memorable candidate. It also gives them more incentive to look at your successes and think that they're even more significant because of the great personal story that you have that is underneath that. And so some examples, it can be so many different things. And so it could be someone who grew up in the rural part of China and worked hard and made their way to a boarding school, excelled, and then got into a top college and graduated at the top. So that's a tremendous success story against the odds. That person has a strong personal story. It might be someone who, even on the other end, the person who is extremely wealthy and they're going to inherit a multinational family business. Now that privilege, but that you don't need to allow that to work against you. You could be talking about how that person took the time to go out into the operations in one of the foreign countries and work on the factory floor to understand what do the employees face, what do they need, how can the company start charitable programs to help the workers. That person starts to have an amazingly strong personal story. Whoops, so sorry. So it can be so many different things in terms of the personal story. You don't have to think that you had to overcome some amazing obstacle in order for you to have success in terms of conveying the personal story. It could also be that you took the circumstances you had and just made the best of them. And it could just be someone, again, who wants to see the world and talks about how they've traveled the world and they draw on all that in their everyday interactions. And so it can be so many different things. You need to really go through, figure out what is your personal story, how do you tell that through the application, all the components of the application so that you stand out. And I get sometimes these questions, what if I don't have a strong personal story? Normally when I am working with a candidate and we go through a very long questionnaire, there is a strong personal story. So the person may not think so at the beginning, but it's there and we help them identify it. In the 5% cases where there really isn't anything that notable, we can still find something that they can use to define themselves. So in general, I would just say for most candidates, this is not an issue. It's not really do I have one, it's what is the story. And then secondly, the whole question of can a strong personal story compensate for other notable weaknesses? And then again, that's a very complicated question, and it really does depend on the candidate, the school you're applying to, how strong are other parts of the candidacy from, GMAT score to GPA, and what's your profile. So if you're overrepresented, then maybe this is not going to happen in terms of personal story overriding a weak GMAT score. If you're underrepresented, you would probably have more of an opportunity for a strong personal story to help compensate. So that's an assessment you probably would want to do with someone who knows admissions really well to help them help you understand, can you use a personal story to override some of the challenges that you have. Now, going down to the next one. Of these, this is a common question I get, which factor is most important for MBA admissions? professional success in most cases is most important. Now, for schools like Harvard and Stanford, that professional success is imperative. It's a given. If you don't have that, you probably will not be competitive. There are other schools where you have more leeway to not have had every single promotion that maybe you should have had, where you can write still a strong enough, compelling application that you will be fine. But career success in general can encourage the committee to overlook weaknesses in other areas. So if you don't have a lot of extracurriculars, for instance, outstanding career success can encourage the admissions committee to say, that's okay, look at the promise in all these other ways. So again, it depends on the school, your profile, and then the strength of some of the other credentials that you have. There are cases, I do get many clients who have disjointed careers, or they didn't get on-time promotions, and they're very nervous about how that's going to impact them in terms of admissions. And it is possible to write the application in a way that kind of mitigates those factors, and so draws the attention away from it, and therefore it would not be an obstacle for you in admissions. The challenge that you'll have now is that with so little essay content, the essays are going to function less in that role for you, and so you will need to use the other parts of the application, the resume in particular, to do that for you. If you have disjointed career track, or you have a lack of on-time promotions, you're going to need to use the application form and the resume to try to draw the attention away. The recommendations can also potentially play that role for you. Establishing professional success, I'm also often asked, how do you do that? Like, what are the ways that you establish that? So outside of promotions and awards, which are obvious ways to establish that you were successful, recommendations play a very key role. You do not want any of the recommendations to be lukewarm about you. They should not be talking about you as being competent, but as being excellent. And so therefore, the recommendations go a long way in creating the impression that the committee has about your success. And then you should be using the resume skillfully, and the space in the essays, even though it's much more abbreviated now, you should be using that space extremely effectively to establish professional success. Then the whole question of, can a candidate establish professional success if they have not had a promotion? Absolutely yes. I do have many candidates who have never had a promotion. The key is to show through the content and wording on the resume, the content of the essays, the content of the recommendations, that you've received an expanding range and depth of responsibilities, that you've given excellence through your work. And then again, the recommendation writers, if they're able to say that you're a unique contributor, that you bring outstanding insights, all those things, again, speak of someone who's extremely valued in the professional arena, and someone of whom others believe there's nothing but success in the future. So certainly there are many ways to establish professional success, even if you've not had a promotion. Have we actually had success in terms of helping candidates with weak professional experience gain admission to top 5 MBA programs? Absolutely yes. And again, sometimes even more success than we would initially think. I remember 2 years ago we had a young lady who was a foreign national from East Asia. So again, that's a competitive profile in terms of a lot of folks of that profile applied to the top programs. And she had an extremely disjointed career path. It is as if with each job she did, she wasn't thinking about what's the relationship between this and the next one. She didn't have a long-term goal in mind. So it really was a puzzle that made no sense in terms of the trajectory. But it was about how we wrote about that experience. And so we decided to don't even try to relate these jobs because they really don't relate. But we made a theme in terms of what each of them gave to her and that what she could bring into the classroom. She did it magnificently. We guided her to make that a strong theme and put everything together just the right way. She gained admission to Wharton, so that was an outstanding outcome. We've had several candidates of that sort of background who've been very successful at schools like Wharton, Columbia, Tuck, Stanford. And so how you write about your experience is very important. So approach the essays, resume, and recommendations very skillfully. And is it possible to overwrite other weaknesses to gain admission to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton, and the other top 5? Certainly there are many examples. And so again, it is very candidate specific. So if you want to understand how likely that is for you, you want to get a very good assessment of your candidacy, what are the weaknesses, and then what's the likelihood that you can override based on strengths in other ways. We have many success stories, and if you were to take a look at the success stories for those of you who do have a weakness in one aspect of your candidacy, it might give you some hope. But really, you have had candidates against odds who have made it into the top programs. So a young man, East Asian foreign national candidate with a 2.7 GPA, gained admission to Harvard. He had a story about what had accounted for those grades, and then he got things back on track. He excelled phenomenally at a top 50, Fortune 50 company, and so that sort of success at a very well-established company certainly helped him. But he was able to just draw the attention away from the GPA and override, even though he was in a very difficult and competitive profile. We had a young man recently who had a 2.1 GPA. He was American of Indian descent. He had a magnificent professional record, and on that basis, we thought he might be able to override and get into Columbia, and in fact, he did. So after writing essays that conveyed that work experience in an outstanding way, he had success at Columbia. We can go through each of these, but each of these just demonstrates that sometimes a certain mix of factors makes it possible to get success against the odds. It cannot work for everybody. I think that when I review someone's record, I generally can have a pretty good sense of whether it's possible and how likely it is. So it won't be a success story for everybody. Just depends on your particular blend. And what you should do is just get a very good assessment. And if you are still wanting to apply to these top schools, even with a weakness, you should do that, but also apply to schools where you're more likely to gain admission. So don't give up prematurely. Just get a really good assessment and understand what you should do in terms of trying. This next part, understanding and addressing school-specific interests. To have success at the top 5 programs and even top 10, it's very important that you understand nuances of admission at your target schools. So when I say nuances of admission, what I mean is that you would have a very good sense of what are the minute things, or maybe not so minute, that shape how they admit candidates. Because if you have one of these things that they disfavor, you may not have a good chance of admissions, even if the rest of your application and the rest of your profile is outstanding. So some of these factors can be a candidate's GPA, a candidate's GMAT score, a candidate's age, years of professional experience, country of origin, type of industry, specialization, whether you're applying round 1, round 2, or round 3, when you're applying and enrolling in admissions process, and then your company. And so just to talk about what I mean with some of these factors, candidates, companies, there's some top programs that believe that even if you have an outstanding candidate from overseas, but that candidate is at a very small shop that no one's heard about, that they're just not open to bringing that person into their program because they think that the people that most benefit from abroad are candidates who are coming out of very large multinational companies. So if you know that this is a school that sees it this way, and you're at a small company and you're abroad, you're a foreign national, then you should know that your odds of success, even if everything else is wonderful, you had a great GPA, great GMAT score, a great success professionally, your odds of success are going to be very small. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't apply. It just means that you should understand what your odds are and therefore cast your net wider to other schools in order to make sure you get some great outcomes. And so another one, candidate's age. I have had some candidates who have had magnificent records in every way that might be 35 and wanting to apply to Harvard Business School. Typically, someone at 35 is not going to have a very strong chance at Harvard Business School. Harvard tends to prefer younger candidates. And so that candidate should apply if they really want to know the outcome, but they should also be very aware that they could be cut simply on age. So each of these factors function in that way. There are some schools that have really kind of hard and fast ways they see who they want to admit, and you should try to become aware of that because it will help you understand your odds and therefore identify a range of schools which is much likely to bring you success in admissions. How do nuances affect odds? I just went through some of those. But again, some of them are more picky about a candidate's GPA, about a candidate's GMAT score. Some of them have, focuses on certain curriculum and therefore prefer students coming from that arena. Some of the schools will prefer younger candidates. Some of them are biased against small companies. Some of them prefer family business candidates. Some of them will favor you in round 1 and not in round 2. Others admit evenly in round 1 and round 2. So again, understanding the nuances and then drawing on that knowledge will make you much more successful in the admissions process. Here are some examples of nuances. I will let you read at greater length through these 2 slides, so we talk about some of these, but I'll go at a high level and just talk about some of them. Harvard, known for seeking leadership excellence among most other things, that's the most important. It expects to see excellence across the board. It prefers younger candidates. Stanford wants that unique wow factor, so even if you have 10 Harvard admits, they want to see who was most unique among that 10, and those are going to be the ones that they tend to prefer more because Stanford's much smaller and they want a very unique class profile. They love entrepreneurs, they love innovative thinkers, they do tend to favor younger candidates, and they are pickier on the GMAT and the GPA simply because it's a smaller class and therefore the bar is set higher. Wharton takes people from a broad variety. They do tend to want a slightly stronger GMAT score because it's a very quantitative program. Columbia takes candidates from across the board. They love folks from family businesses, they love entrepreneurs, and they love people from finance. INSEAD, being in Europe, I think a generalization is that those MBA programs abroad tend to be not as rigid as American programs in certain ways, such as focused on age. INSEAD is much more open to older candidates. GMAT score, INSEAD is much less likely to just hold to a very firm GMAT score and say, if you're not above that, we're probably not going to give you a good look. So it's a little more open. They love folks who are intellectually curious and who have taken the opportunity to gain international experience. And so again, knowing the nuances of the top programs means that you're able to pick better the ones that you're going to gain admission to and then calibrate your approach much more accurately. So finally, in the minutes we have left, I just want to go through 5 high-impact steps to position yourself for success. I'm going to go through these relatively quickly because we are around about at 41 minutes, and I want to make sure to get to some questions and answers after this. So starting from now, we're at the very beginning. Some of these schools have just released their essays, and so you need to start thinking about, well, how do I go from here? What sort of things will get me on the right path? Here are 5 things that can help you direct you onto a good path. Number 1, the GMAT. This is obvious. Everybody knows the GMAT is very important, but some people, when they get a score that they don't really like, some people will tend to try to dismiss the importance of it. The GMAT, unfortunately, can function as what I call a first cut metric, meaning some schools, if you're in a competitive enough pool, will look at your GMAT score and simply say, that is not high enough, and cut you based on the GMAT only. And so some people will find that just shocking. You need to be aware, are you in one of those pools? And if so, take the GMAT very seriously. Understand sort of what is the bare bottom number they're gonna accept from your profile, and you simply must be above that. And then secondly, the GMAT, the reason it's so important to them is that it gives them a standard way to see candidates. When they get candidates from abroad, some of the schools that folks apply to, they don't see a whole lot of candidates from, and so the GMAT gives a metric that they can use to say, can this person do the work at our school, and how do we interpret their GPA? And so it's very important, especially for foreign nationals. And then in the United States, I mean, are there some candidates where the GMAT is not quite as important? Yes, if you're underrepresented, then it will factor as, it won't be as important for you. You'll be able to ideally, if you're using the application well, you'll be able to draw the attention away from that to other things. But in general, the GMAT is extremely important, and so you want to take the time to not only prepare for it excellently, but just make sure you're giving yourself time to test in an ideal situation in a way that you're not pressurized, in time to take it a second time if you want to get your score up, and hopefully the GMAT will be something that works for you. So another high-impact action is begin to cultivate your recommendation writers. And so there's lots of things that you can do to get you on a good path here. Just take a good, thoughtful time thinking about who among the folks that you've worked with would be willing to just write an outstanding recommendation for you. And then among the folks that you have to choose from, then take a good look at, who worked with you longest, what stories can they tell, what's their title, and, make good choices that give, in most cases you have two people you can choose that give a good mixture between those two. Work with the recommendation writers, help them understand what a strong recommendation looks like, and then mostly make sure they have sufficient time to write, because the last thing you want is someone writing a recommendation at the last minute, not putting attention into it, not putting good detail into it, because recommendations can be as important as the essays, and so you want to make sure that that is working for you. Another high-impact action is research your schools and then create a timeline. When you're researching, you should be looking at everything from curriculum, teaching methods, special programs, culture, corporate recruiters, who's actually going to the school to recruit, and therefore do you blend into that? And then what are the admissions preferences? Do they prefer younger candidates? Do they prefer people in entrepreneurship? And so research those schools well. You're going to need that not only for an interview. When you're talking in an interview, you will need it ideally for the essays, even if there's a small amount of content. Hopefully you'll be able to make references to some of that. But in doing that research, you'll also be able to draw on it in a way to assess your competitiveness. How does that information help you understand how competitive you are for each of the schools that might be on your top list? And then secondly, try to divide out your schools on the basis of this research in terms of what is more of a sure shot, what is a reach school. And if you are intent on going next year, then make sure you're applying to a very good mix of sure shot and reach schools. And then finally, create a good timeline. And so you, if you decide I'm applying to 6 schools, then you need to look and say, of those 6, are some of them safe for me to apply to in round 2? If not, how do I get them all done in round 1? What is the timeline? When do I need to have things done with the first application to move to the second, and so forth? So timeline is really important. Just get that broad strategy going for yourself. Number 4, application form and resume. These are going to be much more important this time around, so make sure you work on those early. Here are some good tips about the application form and the resume. Make great use of the fields on the application forms. Take very good care about expressing long-term and short-term goals, because your short-term goal can be used to cut you. If a school doesn't think that they can place you in a job, they might look at your short-term goal and say, okay, we just can't take them in. Or long-term goal, if it doesn't seem realistic, that can be a problem. So take good care in constructing long-term goal and short-term goal. And then take care in expressing why you moved between jobs and the reason for leaving. Take good care in how you talk about that. And make sure on that form you're displaying your greatest achievements. Your resume, make sure you're showing your most important achievements, using compelling language, and covering a breadth that includes extracurriculars, because for an application resume, extracurriculars are important along with professional and academic achievement. And then number 5, take the time that you have between now and admissions to strengthen your extracurricular record. Extracurriculars can be the difference between admission and not admission at top schools like Stanford and Wharton and Harvard. So, make sure that those are working for you. Many people ask me, well, if I need to build up and I start to do something now, doesn't it look like I'm doing it at the last minute and therefore it's not sincere? Again, depends on the candidate. If you have a couple things that date back, so you've been doing a couple things for a few years, adding something new now will not look so horrific. If you're someone who has pretty much nothing and you start 3 things, that's more problematic, but there are many ways to add on things new that don't look like you're doing it just at the last minute. So, as we work with candidates at MBAadmit.com, that's one thing that we are working with our candidates on, is how to greatly improve the extracurricular record so that it becomes a great strength of your application. And we are very definitely able to work with people who are strengthening within 2 months or 3 weeks of when they're applying, and they can do that effectively. So try to get some ideas about how you might do that if you think that your extracurricular record needs to be strengthened. And then finally, feel free to reach out to us and contact us. We are really appreciative of the fact that you joined us today on this webinar. So please visit our website at the link above and take advantage of these 3 offers that we're giving to you today. So a free profile evaluation, 30% off regular pricing, and the free MBA admissions frequently asked questions ebook. And please do sign up for our newsletter so we can stay in touch, give you insights as the admissions season continues to progress, keep you abreast of our webinars that we will be doing on our website. And then here is how you can be in touch with us also. You can feel free to send an email directly to me, and whatever we can do, let us know if there's some way that we can help you. So I will take now some questions and answers. So let's just see. I think I'm going to be fed some questions in just a moment. Okay, I have one question here. I'm not entirely certain what the person is referring to, but they said, what do you mean when you say make references to your professional successes in your essays? Doesn't that look, obnoxious, arrogant, contrived? Not if you write it well, but certainly in the essays. Depends on the topic. You should be trying to touch on some of your achievements to keep them front and center. And so how you write about it makes all the difference between whether does it come across as arrogant or does it read smoothly. So your goal should be get some of that into the essays and just write it in a tone that will work for you. Someone just asked a question, do schools consider your current income as a part of your candidacy? And again, that's going to depend on the particular candidate. For some, say you're an entrepreneur, then certainly the income or the number of clients is going to be a metric of how successful the company is. But it's not imperative that your company is extremely important at the time or extremely successful at the time you're applying, because the whole point of going to business school may be to learn more skills to take it to the next level. So I wouldn't be too worried about the income as a factor in admissions. If your income is just too low, that may be a concern, and if so, sometimes they might ask you about it in an interview. Another flag that some will have is if the income jumps tremendously. So I had a candidate who actually had gone from a major company to start his own consulting company, and his income went up dramatically. And so the committee, he was actually applying to an eMBA program, but they asked him about that, and he explained that billing himself, he just that everything was coming to him, and given the clients he had, which were Fortune caliber companies, it made sense, and so he just addressed their questions in the interview effectively, and he gained admissions. So I wouldn't worry too much about the income factor in admissions. Okay, another question here about how do campus visits affect admissions chances. You should assume that if you're in a reasonable distance to the school you're applying to, that the school will think you should have visited. Otherwise, they will think that you are not taking them very seriously. So if you are in Massachusetts and you're applying to Columbia, it's really hard to understand why you would not have gotten on an airplane and gone to Columbia University to take a look at the school, sit in on classes, and so forth. So in that situation, I think it would hurt you. If you are in a nonprofit organization in California and you're applying to Wharton and you just can't get the funds to get to Wharton, I think that would be more understandable. So it just depends on, what is your industry, what is your income, what is the geographical location between where you are and the school. But what is important, if you cannot go to a school, is that you find other ways to reach out. So today with, Skype and ability to email the heads of clubs and so forth, you should be making some effort to get in touch with alumni members, current students, and have discussions. And then that conveys to the committee that you're serious about them and you've taken steps to get to know the school and the culture and so forth. I have another question here about if someone does not have a good GPA in a bachelor's degree, but they have an excellent master's GPA, will that be helpful? Well, first thing to mention is that for Beat the GMAT, I had done a webinar a few months back about overriding a low GPA, and so you might want to take a look at that and some of the advice that was in that. But in general, yes, if you have a master's degree, particularly if it's a 2-year degree and not just a 1-year degree, then you're able to use that as the most recent, example of your abilities, and therefore most of the schools will look to the master's and give you the benefit of that GPA. And for some candidates, honestly, who have a really disastrous undergrad GPA, sometimes they go to get a master's degree for that purpose because they know they're not going to get in with a 1.5 GPA, so they go get a master's and they get their 3.8, and then that becomes the GPA that they get into the schools with. So it should be helpful. There are some exceptions, and so again, going back to this hyper-competitive pool of Indian foreign national male engineers, that candidate, I can't say with the same amount of certainty that that would happen, but in my experience, because I have had Indian foreign national male engineers in that situation where the first GPA wasn't so great, but then they got a master's, and the master's was, wonderful, that they had good outcomes. And so, in my experience with candidates, it still holds for the Indian foreign national male engineer, but I would just be cautious to make a broad statement that for all such candidates it would be effective. So, if you're in that situation and you're in a hyper-competitive pool, just be more cautious. Okay, I'm just sifting through right now some additional questions. I'll try to take 2 more. I have a general questions about what are the important experiences to use in essay prompts. And there really is no way to respond to that in general because each candidate is so unique. And one of the great things you should be trying to do as you strategize about how to best put forward a strong application is what are the factors that will most want the school to say yes to you. You're going to have an array of very unique factors. You should hone in on those. And then you should make sure that that range of factors is present across the application. So now that you have less space in the essays to present information, it will just be important that that information, that those points are made in the other parts of the application, so the resume and the application form. So in terms of what in particular would be used for the essays, it truly will matter what are the essays, what are your greatest strengths, and then what do you want under the spotlight, because whatever you put in the essay gets the attention, it stays on the radar screen, and so you do want to be very careful about what you're putting in the essays. So that may not be very helpful for you, but it's just such a broad question, and it really does depend on each candidate. And I'll give you a couple examples. I had one young man who was from a European country, and he was in a small type of investment bank, and so he's a white European, and the general profile was not going to be successful at our top schools just because it's a small school, a small shop. It wasn't one of the major banks, but his personal story was amazing. He had grown up in an extremely rural part of his country, in a tiny, tiny little town and where there's a lot of poverty. And so that was, to me, the piece that would help him override what might have been harder otherwise being at a small kind of no-name bank. And, good, strong academics, but not, not first in his class. And so we had to make sure that that storyline was front and center. And so if I was looking at an essay set, I would be trying to ask myself, is there any way to get that story into any of those essay prompts? Because I know that that's going to be a pivotal factor for him. And so for another candidate, there may not have been any personal story in those same essay prompts. It just depends on the needs of the candidacy, and then also what are the essay topics. Okay, I see a couple questions, which I'll try to get to quickly. One is, would a CFA help a candidate with a low GPA? Is that enough to eclipse the low GPA? In general, it's not going to it's not going to cover for the low GPA. It's certainly a rare credential for candidates to have, and it's extremely difficult to get. Therefore, it's going to speak to your intellectual level, to your commitment to success, and so all great things. Time management also. But generally, I don't think for most candidates it will override a low GPA. I think that it can be one of many factors that helps to override, but I think other things need to be present. So whether it's other courses that you've taken that show A's, like in extension school courses and so forth, there are a minority of candidates maybe that are underrepresented for whom maybe the CFA could override, but I think for most candidates it will help to pull attention away, but it by itself may not be sufficient. And when I say low GPA, I'm talking like 2.8, 2.9. If you are more like a 3.2, then that will help you a lot more. So, and then going back to another one, how specific do you have to be in the long-term and short-term goals that you present? For the short term, a lot of the schools these days are using the short-term goal to weed out candidates. And so if you are, what's an example? So say you've been in the nonprofit world and you've been a teacher, and then now you want to go to business school, and you say the job that I want to get out as soon as I get out of business schools, I want to go work for Morgan Stanley in a very finance-focused role. They're going to look at that candidate who didn't have finance in a job and say, you don't have the background. Why would Morgan Stanley or any top bank ever hire you? You don't seem to have the skills. And so the candidate may be thinking, well, in business school, I'll pick up the courses and then I can go get the job. The school is going to think you don't have the record that will be attractive to these top companies, and therefore you're going to get in our school, try to get into those companies, not get in. That won't be good for us in terms of our placement rate, and therefore the short-term goal is used to deny that person. So you have to be very careful that the short-term goal sounds realistic, that you can actually get it. And so take a good hard look at your background, your future goals. It doesn't mean you have to stay within the same industry or within the same role, but you have to be able to, as I say, connect the dots. You've got to show that what I have already, the skills, experience, will allow me to get to this job very comfortably, that I won't have a very difficult time convincing recruiters that I will be great in what I say the short-term goal is. And so just take care with that. Know that many of the schools weed out candidates on that basis. And then the long-term goal, that's important in different ways, and again, it's dependent on the candidate. And so for some candidates, if you're overrepresented, there's a lot of folk of your background who are applying. If you present a long-term goal that is pretty much the same as 60% of that pool, then now you're indistinguishable, and so that's not so great. You'd want to try to give some definition to make you stand out. So in that case, definition is a good thing. There are other candidates who, again, they're not in hyper-competitive pools, and therefore they probably have more latitude to not be as specific, but to give a very strong general sense of where they're going. I think that what the committee most wants to hear is that you have a sense of where you're going, I know from a candidate's perspective, sometimes it's frustrating because you may not know where you want to go, and in fact, you may be wanting to use business school as the means to figure that out. And so even though the schools know that people do want to use business school in that way, and that many people say they're going to do one thing and then come into the school and change, and the schools know that, they still are much more comfortable with the person that sounds directed. And again, the more competitive your pool is, then the more you want your long-term goal not to sound generic, not to sound like most of the other people in that same pool, and then to have more definition. And so when you're trying to not make it generic, that doesn't mean you have to change what it is. And so say you want to start your own manufacturing company, you don't have to change that. You just have to give it good definition so that you are standing out relative to other people. All right, I think that may have had to be the last question I take. Let me just see if there's anything else to touch on right now. I just think that, this is going to be a very interesting season simply because there's been so many changes. My gut is that it is going to be more competitive because the change in the common recommendation is going to make it a lot easier for people to put in applications at many more schools. And so for those of you, just getting started, bear that in mind, and you might want to add on a couple schools to the number that you were planning to apply to before, and start early. So for many candidates, round 1 is going to be better than round 2. That's not true for everybody, but the volume is higher in round 2 because many candidates wait until round 2 to have the holiday vacation time to apply. So there's generally more applications, more applicants, and fewer seats. So bear that in mind. And if it's at all possible to get any applications in during round 1, you should strive to do that. But I do wish you all the very best as you begin your admissions process. And again, reach out to us at any of the addresses above if you would like to have any additional work with us. And I'll go back once again to this page where we show the offers that we've made for you for attending. Thank you so much for joining us today. And as always, it was wonderful to be with Beat the GMAT.